Doesn't it feel like it has been a really long week? So I thought it would be nice to actually look at some really beautiful recent fashion inspiration from Paris Fashion Week and see what inspiration we can use for our own clothes. So these are all quite vintagey looks and with lots of details I thought you could use for your new sewing project. And quite often things are quite negative. You know, when you start looking at too many images, you start being very critical. So I thought to start the weekend on a positive note, let's look at some beautiful clothes and get inspired. From tiny details, clever methods, to some very pretty dresses. Before we dive in and analyze how these clothes are made and how you can draft your own, let me introduce myself if you haven't watched any of my videos before, and you might well not have. I'm Charlotta. I am originally a fashion designer and pattern cutter, and nowadays I'm just really passionate about teaching all of you to draft, design and stitch your own clothes. So have a look in the description below if you'd like to learn more with me, and otherwise, of course, I would love a thumbs up from you if you enjoyed it, and do please subscribe if you want to see more. But let's have a look at some really beautiful vintage inspired contemporary clothes. This will be a really mixed bag, but we have got sort of slightly utilitarian capes like this. Also at Dior, there was the bar jacket reinterpreted for summer in a really nice way. I absolutely fell in love with these two styles from Yohei Hamoto, which have for me like a real vintage, also like a sort of movie inspiration, but they're both examples of using cuts and fabrics really well, and I think they could be really inspirational for your own project on how to do that. Of course, Schiaparelli is very big at the moment. I quite like this collar because it's a fantastic example of sort of vintage volume, and it's also very easy to make yourself if you fancy a over-the-top coat or jacket. And there was also lots of really nice two-tone inspiration like with MS, so we're going to go through how you can use that. Then this dress, I saw it and I just had to include it because it's not too fitted, it's really feminine but also very wearable. There's also lots of really clever detailing like this Valentino jacket. I wasn't a fan of the collection, but this was really beautiful, the details, how it's been used. Also, by comparison, have a look with Gucci. Again, a really nice, delicate detail and really easy to use for yourself. And finally, this collection I really liked for its potential for using old lace, tablecloths and more. So have a look, some really nice color, sort of tonal lace, and also some really nice just white lace, but sort of using what it's a perfect way for upcycling tablecloths, but making it into really wearable clothes. So let's switch over to a table and have a look in detail into these current clothes and how you can take inspiration from them, which can be vintage inspired or contemporary, but always your own, because you can interpret it and design it for yourself for your next sewing project. So let's have a look at how you can get from image to sewing pattern by analyzing what design details there are and how you can draft your own. This style is really nice because it sort of references lots of utilitarian, sportswear, military influences, and mountaineering even from the mid-century. It's a really simple garment, so what you have is, I think, very similar to a kimono style sleeve, but it's left open, and then you have your attached jacket, and you can see they've got quite dropped shoulders, so it's probably quite boxy like this. And then again, you probably have the sleeve, which is either this long or it might even be longer. What you basically want, you want this distance to be, if you look at it, it's sort of nearly the same distance as this. It's slightly shorter. So it might be sort of in between. And I think it's sort of stitched on maybe to down here even, but then it's left open. So rather than it being a proper sleeve, it basically becomes quite cape-like. But I think you still have a fully finished top as such here. Of course, you could also leave this open here. So it's a full-on cape, and what would be quite nice as well, you could actually add an open zip to these two sides, so you can actually close it and make it into a jacket if needed, but then also leave it hanging like a cape. It's also got really nice pockets here and here, and can you see how it folds really nicely because it's so boxy, so it actually folds more like this, but that's just because it sort of drapes around the body. And then it has like really oversized epaulettes to again go with the military theme. So you can pick out the bits you want from this. So you could make it more fitted or more A-line. You can make it this oversized. It would be beautiful in a wool as well for sort of a cape, throw over anorak. And my favorite detail is what is basically could be a hoodie, or it could be a shawl collar or sailor collar. In this case, it's a hoodie, so it's a hoodie at the back. But then rather it being open all the way, it's got an insert. So it's sort of much warmer, and you could even have it slightly coming up if you wanted to. And then of course what it has as well is a zip again in here, and then you can zip it up again to make it look more like a traditional hoodie if you wanted to. But that's a really nice detail. So it's got lots of vintage details. So you can pick and choose to make your own, really quick to draft and also quite quick to stitch, throw on cape anorak. You could make it waterproof, you could fleece line it. Lots of nice inspiration there for both sort of rainy spring days and also even for this autumn. Let's have a look at some jackets next. And we had the Dior, and there was also of course the Hermes, and finally there was also the Valentino. And they're all sort of doing quite nice things with what we think of as classic vintage jackets. So let's sort of draw them out and see what details you might want to pick. And what I quite liked about the Dior, and there was lots of repetitions and different versions of this, and she's wearing it off her shoulder, so it's a bit distorted. But I think it's not actually drafted like that, it's just how it's styled, because there's quite a few of these. So what it is quite a flat revers collar, and of course you could use the sailor shortcut for that, so where you change your sailor collar into a revers collar, so you could use that. And it was quite a double breasted styles, but of course that is sort of up to you. And then what, instead of a tailored shoulder, they had that sort of dropped shoulder. You have this, I think with bar jacket, there are some versions with a grown-on gusset sleeve, but they've sort of made it for summer. There's like a really short grown-on sleeve with a bigger waistline, bigger armhole. And then I've drawn a seam in where the belt is, but I think it might actually be a one piece. Could be either. So I draw this side with our one piece. And then of course again it has a classic suit jackets. But there's also variation. This is quite a nice way of doing a really lightweight version of a suit. It could be a blouse, it could also become a dress if it was longer, but really wearable with a little bit of a vintage hint with the bar suit, but reinterpreted again. So it's really nice wearable detail there. And of course, when you can have a belt and the contrast buttons, to style it how you want to. And of course, you don't have to have double-breasted, because double-breasted is not for everybody. Let's have a look at the Valentino in the foreground next, which is the white jacket, this all black piping. And I think this is a really clever way of, maybe you already done like a simple jacket, you might have a sewing pattern you want to use, or you might draft a really simple jacket. Of course, it's a men's wear thrown in women's wear, but I think it's sort of the styling idea is very really unisex, and it'd be really nice in a knit jacket, in a really thick knit fabric as well, because it sort of echoes a little bit of a cardigan. But what it basically is, it's got a classic stand collar, so you can use the tutorial to make your own. And then it has the darts coming from here, so that's quite a nice detail. And then the pocket placement is always really important. And I think for women's wear, you have to be really careful where you place that pocket. And then, of course, it has like a classic button stand and two slightly bigger pockets here. And that's sort of quite important, playing with proportion. With pockets, I read that you get the proportions right, that it is flattering. And then the sleeves, again, a classic sleeve, but then just by being gathered in a cuff, it again gives you a sort of vintage. I think it's sort of a little bit like a shirt, also like sort of blouson, mid-century, so slightly what I would have called like sporty or college clothes. I can sort of see all the influences there. And of course, what makes it special, and you could use an existing pattern you already drafted or sewing pattern and update it just by basically highlighting what you want in either binding. I wouldn't use board binding, I would make my own. It might be grosgrain as well, or like what you would call an Ottoman grosgrain, which has like a nice rip effect. And if you used that, you could use it for the corners, or you would have to buy fabric and then cut your own binding. But that really sort of defines what you want to define. And of course, you don't have to have these pockets. If you say patch pockets don't really work for me, even if you had like a welted pocket and added some bias binding to that, and you could also, for example, add piping in these dart lines to accentuate what you want to accentuate. But it's just a really nice way of highlighting what you want. And you could use bias binding, piping would be really nice as well, a little bit more subtle, but there's lots of options to basically drawing a little bit. It's like illustrating what you want the eye to be drawn to. And then of course the buttons are the same color as the contrast, so it works really well. It's a really nice way of maybe updating a jacket you already have. And finally, the MS does something similar, but in a very MS tonal way. A little bit 70s, I think. What do you think? Just in the color scheme. But what's really nice, again, sort of a classic, it's basically a jeans jacket, isn't it? Or of course could be a leather jacket as well. And my drawing is going slightly off kilter. But again, it's got another stand here, a collar stand, but this time they've done the classic where it goes to a point like the collar stand of a shirt collar, and then actually has the button stand coming out, and the button stand is sort of grown on even. It doesn't really have any top stitching, and then it's quite a straight boxy style. But then what they've done again, you've got your waistband, you've got your sleeves, which looks like they're folded up, which again makes it sort of more summery, but of course you could make it long again. And then again it has like a yoke with the pocket attached, which is that sort of typical jeans look. And again, it's got patch pockets, but of course what you could do as well is just have the flap and then have the pocket internally. And what is always really important is that you get the yoke at the right level. Oh, it's got quite a nice sort of satchel type fastening out of leather, which again is a sort of MS detail. And what would be really important for women's wear is to get that yoke high enough, because you don't want that near your bust point. You sort of want that above your bust point if possible. So that's a great thing if you're drafting your own, you want details like that. You can put it exactly where you want it. And then of course what works really well is highlighting, again this time they've done in leather, but you could do it in the same fabric, different tones. You could do one in a print or a check. You could do two types of denim, and that sort of two-tone denim has been going on for quite a while now, which still looks really nice. You could use leather or something, or if again, like if you want to do it more casual, you could, again, what's sort of been that sort of retro look, which is really nice. They use like an outdoor fabric and then either a plate or a fleece fabric for part of the garment, which I always think is a really nice contrast, because when you get different textures, like smooth, shiny and fluffy, and you can also do different colors, or you can do the same color but different textures. But lots of really nice ideas there. This Schiaparelli collar is a little bit out there, but what I loved about it, I don't know where I would do it in Sepra, but I love how simple it is to make if you want it to make it yourself. So what you need to do is draft basically a sailor collar. I'm just going to quickly draw the jacket out. And the sailor collar in this case starts normal, but then rather it being really flat, which we normally aim for, a really good fit, it basically has lots of extra volume. So it gives you that sort of nice curly effect. And I think they've actually left it loose at the bottom. But it basically means you have like a frill effect, and then of course the back is normal, and what you basically end up is a pattern piece which starts off being with the center back here, which starts off being quite normal, and then instead of being straight, it basically curls probably like that, and the curl gives you that frilly moving effect, which is really fun. You could again add it to an existing sewing pattern, and it's really quick to draft and will completely change the look of whatever you're designing. So it's a really nice detail technique to add to a jacket to update it. Let's finish with some pretty dresses with vintage details. So this dress, actually the dress itself, the body is a little bit odd. If you look closely, you can see there's a very strangely positioned pocket. But what is really nice is how it is cut, so it sits just on the shoulder. So there has been lots of off the shoulder stuff recently, but this, and I do wonder whether it's done on purpose or not, but this looks like it sits just on the roundness of your shoulder. So it's a little bit like a dropped shoulder, but sitting just at that edge. So I think the shoulder sits sort of maybe here to there. And then you would end up with like a really weirdly shaped armhole. So you just extend it, and then on your trowel you have to make sure that curve is perfect. And that, of course, is a nice thing. If you draft your dress for yourself, you can get exactly the shoulder you want, and it'd be quite straightforward. You just extend it on your block a little bit, on your fitted block, and then fit it. If you bought this off the rail, in 9 out of 10 cases, it just wouldn't fit our exact curves. And then what's really nice, it's just got like a sort of skimming look. I think it's a real day there, really wearable dress with like nice vintage details. And what they've actually done is they've put a sort of panel here. And I think this might actually be curved rather than angled. And then it's just got seams going down. So it's sort of skimming. And what's really nice, I've put a slit in here so you can move it, but then there's more fabric underneath. So it's not an open slit. It's basically a really deep pleat. And again, that makes it really wearable. It's like a kick. And I don't know whether it's on both sides or just on one side. Either way would be really nice. Then it has the pockets I mentioned, which I find a bit weird. So you got sort of patch pockets just above the pleat, which is sort of on your hip. And if you place them well, they can be really pretty. But then can you see, I'm actually not going to draw them on because I find them so odd. It has pockets just underneath your bust, which are a bit pointless. You're never going to use them. And I also don't really see, you know, I don't think they're that aesthetically pleasing. But it's quite nice to have top stitched our seams. And I think the pockets as well. So again, that is sort of like a really nice effect. And then what's really nice is that you have basically little loops, probably made out of a rouleau. So like little biased silk ropes. And there you have to make sure they're all exactly the same length, and you sort of place them along. And then there's just a really nice, again, the same rouleau, the same rope is threaded through, and then has this sort of detail. And I think that's a real lovely sort of vintage details, which sort of lifts it. It sort of has like quite a lot of sort of fashion history, inspiration, but it really sort of frames the neck really nicely, but it is still very day wear and very really wearable. So that was like a dress where I just thought, oh yes, I can see that, you know, coming off a catwalk and being really wearable. And you might just adapt, you know, have a detail on a blouse or on a top. You know, you can put it in lots of different places, but it just changes the look. It works really well. Another really nice, just pretty dress was this, which actually has a quite similar neckline, don't you think? So again, it has that sort of neckline which sits just here. So again, I actually think this would be even better if you draft it yourself, because you can get the perfect fit. And then in this case, it is literally just to your normal armhole. Maybe the armhole is a little bit dropped. But again, you can do it quite subtly just by making a trowel of your basic garment and then just drawing in exactly the neckline and armhole line you want. And then it's quite nice because the bodice is not fully fitted. I'm just trying to find the seams. I would imagine it has a seam, and then of course the skirt is really full, so that looks like a maybe a half circle, what do you think, or full circle? And then it's just got normal sleeves, and of course it's got the really nice fabric edge, which is a frill, so you can use like a lace style, an embroidered fabric. And what I think might happen is that you have bust starts where they're not that visible, and then maybe they either done it really well, maybe a dart moved slightly to the side so it's not visible in the beginning, in the middle. but you can't actually tell, which is really interesting. Or it might actually be a bit looser and then be sort of tightened in the belt. You can't, it would be interesting to see when it goes to production, when you can actually see the details a little bit better. But I thought that's another really wearable, nice dress, and that silhouette is sort of very more wearable than the off the shoulder we've seen recently. And let's finish off with some really nice lace. And I thought these two, this is not a it's more couture designer, so it's Paris Fashion Week. But I thought these are really nice ideas of using, if you have any old handkerchiefs or even tablecloths, anything like that, anything with lace work, but done in quite a contemporary way. So by using like a simple blouse style with the collar, and again like the simple top, which is quite a little bit of Claire McCardle, which is literally probably like this, and then they used the edge, so if you have existing fabric, and then of course all you have is your little darts here, which are invisible, which is a really nice way of maybe using a smaller piece you have. And then again, the trousers again would be good for a really big tablecloth where maybe some of it isn't embroidered, and then using the embroidered bits to do the trouser leg. And they're quite a straight trouser, so they're really easy to cut, especially with elasticated waist. It might even be a trouser leg like this, which means you can use up the fabric really well and get a really nice effect. And then again, the blouse, or the, well, it's a dress, isn't it? But it's, you could interpret, you know, it as a blouse, as a shirt. What is really nice, but you got a collar, which is completely neat, with a separate stand, which would be really good for trying out your two-piece collar method. And then it's got like a keyhole button stand, and then again you can use a tablecloth to do it, a short blouse, a long blouse, you know, like a boxy style, or like an overstyled like this. And then again, what you have is a contrast between all the details here, and then a quite a chunky cuff, and a sort of, both of these, it sort of breaks up the floweriness of the fabric. So having the solid pieces here works really well, and then on these is having the concentrated details at the sort of opposite ends works really well as well. So it's a nice way of sort of looking at inspiration for using old fabrics. And then of course these are just more sort of interpretations of these. They're a little bit more evening maybe, but again, if you have an old tablecloth which might have some marks or stains, if you dye it, that sometimes covers it up, and then you can sort of again, it looks completely different. But again, you can see the shirt dress is really nice because it's got a solid waistband. So you got your solid waistband, and then you got the classic shirt, and of course that'd be lovely for using an existing shirt dress pattern. Again, the button stand and the collar are plain, and then you've got like a gathered bodice, a really classic shirt dress. And then they've done the sleeves a bit bigger, but if you did a classic sleeve with a waistband, again, it would be with a cuff, it again sort of makes something which is quite delicate, quite ornamental, and it frames it in a really wearable way. And you can see it in all the styles. It's done really well, how the really ornamental, really special fabric is contrasted and framed by more plain aspects. And of course, if you have a tablecloth, often there are sections which are plain, and these are really nice ways of using it. I nearly forgot to look at two of my favorite looks so far this season, which are both by Yo Yamamoto, and there was a whole row of red dresses. You can see it more in the second image, which work together beautifully. Quite different cuts, but all made from what looks like layers of maybe chiffon and with a black base layer, which gives it a real depth and which also makes the seams pop out. I really liked this style, which was I think sort of a little bit, it's very individual, but it has like a little bit maybe a 1920s influence. I can also see maybe 1980s, and it also looks like it could be out of a movie with the fantastic hat and lace. It's a very stunning visual look, which is why I had to share them with you. But what I love about it, that if you love sort of 1920, 30 styles, you can easily make like a simple dress like that, which has a really nice sort of flappy sleeve, I imagine, on both sides, and it could be either grown on. I have sort of drawn it as like a handkerchief, like a separate, but of course you could also make it completely grown on, but it gives sort of nice detail. And then it is basically just a sort of skimming, nearly straight dress, which is what made me think of both the 1920s and then the 1980s. But of course the 1980s referenced quite a lot of 20s stuff. And then what I think you got, and this is where it becomes quite Yohyamoto, you've got sort of slightly different seams in different places, and because of the chiffon and it being sort of layers of red and black, it really stands out. But again, can you see that button stand, which finishes a bit further up? That's sort of a real 1920s detail, I think. Do you agree, or do you think I'm on the wrong track? And then of course this is the seam allowance, which is sort of showing through chiffon, because it's like 4 layers. It might be a French seam as well, so it might be 4 layers, which is why it's really standing out. And then you have like an open slit here, but instead of it just being open, you've got like 7 layers underneath. And I think it might just be cut completely straight and have like slits in different areas. So the back, oh, I'm gonna draw it too short, I apologize. It's much longer, of course, but of course we've got this one here, so that might come out at the back like that, and then again be a slit, because you can see there's something happening at the back there, where she's walking. And then you just got sort of 7 layers of chiffon. It looks like it's like 2 layers of chiffon, and or maybe even 3, and then a black base layer, and you can sort of see it on the underneath of the sleeve. But you could make a really simple slip dress for summer, but adding sort of cut lines and sort of playing with how your seams in chiffon show through. So you could interpret lots of different ways on skirts, on tops, but it's by using the same fabric in several layers, it makes it quite dynamic, and you sort of have the seams showing through, so you get like lots of tones of red. But it's really easy to make because you can use the same fabric. But you can even see on the dresses in the background, because we got the layers of red, it becomes sort of really floaty and nice. It looks really delicate, but at the same time really wearable, because it's like a daytime dress. So I thought these looks really elegant. It could be a really special dress, but it also could be really wearable. And the same as this is a little bit like a classic sort of nearly like what Marilyn Monroe wore for her famous movie scene with the wind, but sort of slightly reinterpret in a very Yohyamoto way, very clever sort of pattern cutting, because it has that sort of classic neckline, but then we have like a sort of top stitch line. So again, you can sort of, you can interpret that how you want, but that's quite a classic cut you can easily do from your fitted garment. And then of course you've got a fitted waist. This might be cut unbiased, but you could also just add your seams where you want it. So it's quite a classic style. The back of course could be like this, or different. But then what's really nice is that they've done, instead of a straight waistband, it's basically a waist like this. And I think then there's a second one like that. And then again, you can see the seam allowance is there. And I'm half wondering if they put something in the seam allowance, because can you see here the seam allowances don't show through, and then suddenly it becomes like a detail down here. So they might have even stitched in like a white bias binding or something, so it really shows through the design details you want. So some of the seams might be invisible, but where you want it to highlight, you basically, instead of piping or binding, you put something in your seam allowance and it becomes a really nice detail. So I thought it was really clever, and that's where you can see it's sort of vintage inspiration. It's a really classic dress, but then the way it's treated is really special. And again, you can see it's lined in a different, I think again it may be lined in the black, but that sort of grounds it, because what can happen if you work on a chiffon, but even after 2 or 3 layers, it's still quite see-through. And if you would line it in a skin-colored fabric, it would make it really pale. So by lining it in a black fabric, it makes a really deep red. So that's a really, if you say, oh, that style isn't for me, by looking at very good, very high-end, Yuya Moti is an amazing fashion designer, and there's also amazing construction and pattern cutting. By looking at it, you can sort of pick up construction tips for your own garments. So if you want to make a see-through blouse, think about what you use to line it. So if you use a lighter fabric, it will sort of make it quite pale or really make it stand out, like I've done for the seams. And if you use a darker fabric, that will ground it, make the color really deep. So some really beautiful details to finish off our review. Looking at these beautiful clothes certainly put me in a lovely mood, and I hope they also lifted your spirits a bit if you had a long week too, and maybe even inspired you for a little different detail for your next sewing project. And I always love that with contemporary clothes, there's so many styles out there where you can sort of pick the details which suit you, while also making the clothes which are just you and perfect for you, which of course is why I love teaching you all to pattern cut your own. Do let me know in the comments if there's any details you particularly liked, or maybe some you didn't, or any other comments you might have about the clothes we just looked at. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely weekend, and hopefully you will get some pattern cutting or sewing time for yourself. Bye!